You look Pitbull. You look like you.
I'm Mr. Worldwide. You're so handsome.
Yes.
Thank you.
Is this foundation?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Hey,
Vlog.
vlog.
Y'all are here.
It's me, Pitbull.
I'm gonna bother JC.
It's Mr. Worldwide. I don't know, do we? I love the facial hair. I did so good on it.
It's great. Alright guys, go ahead and get our notebooks out, face the front, all that good stuff.
I am not going to face the front.
Can we reveal to them what our costumes are?
Yes, you can. Black swan, white swan. We're switching races for the night. I'm the black swan.
Clip it. Cancel her. Take out of context.
Imagine, there's a clip of it. I feel like we get canceled so fast.
We would all bring out so much advice.
You only for cosplaying Pitbull.
They be like, what the fuck? What would I get canceled for?
I should do Pitbull. Hey, like my costume.
You should literally post it on
You copied me.
At
Pitbull, you copied me.
copy me, my brand.
We need a bar for her.
No. Cause like,
She's scary to me. Yeah, I can see.
Alright ladies, I need everybody's attention, I need everybody quiet. Facing the front, let's go ahead and get started and finished up because we have a quiz on this tomorrow. It should be another really easy quiz like the periodic table, the first periodic table quiz.
You talk to sister and she's 27.
so my sister, she's 23. Rock on.
Alright. So, I passed out a reference sheet for you. Try to keep this with your periodic table. It's going to be stuff that you'll need to look up with, that I don't necessarily make you memorize throughout pretty much the rest of the class. So it'll come in handy with that. We'll talk more about the parts we need as we get to it. Some of it will be for this section, some of it's not, we won't use for another couple weeks. So, I think this is the slide we left off on.
Yeah.
I don't think we got through it.
Alright, so, remember an ion is an atom, or a group of atoms with a charge. So they either lost or gained electrons. Valence electrons, remember, are the electrons on the outside of the atom. That's what they mean by this ns2np6 orbitals. That's just a fancy way of saying on the outside of the atom, which is what you need to know. Alright? The octet rule is a rule that governs basically all interactions between atoms. Whether they bond ionically, covalently, any way. And it says that the reason they interact, the reason they form bonds, whether it's ionic bonds or covalent bonds or whatever other bond we can talk about, is so that they can have 8 valence electrons. They're going to beg, steal, borrow, share, whatever, in order to get 8 valence electrons. Right? There are 2 exceptions to the octet rule. Remember what they were? Hydrogen and helium. Right? They only need 2 valence electrons to be stable. Yeah. Eventually, for sure, yeah. Alright? So, a lot of this is kind of review from the last section. So metals, remember, will lose their valence electrons to expose their inner shell. They'll have form positive ions. We call them cations. Some examples are Na plus and Ca2 plus. Nonmetals will gain more valence electrons to become filled or stable, to get their 8. They'll have negative charges. We call them anions. And Cl minus and O minus 2 are examples of them. And the noble gases are not going to gain or lose electrons. They already have the 8 valence electrons they want, so they don't have to steal, borrow, share any electrons from any other atoms. So they will not gain or lose the electrons. They already have filled valence shell already. All right? So we're good with this slide. We got it? Okay, I'll give you enough minutes. So then we can finish it up.
Gracious, I'm gonna pay myself to bake play the line.
I hope that was on film.
It was.
Oh, let's see.
Look so. Do I look cute?
The braces.
Do I look cute, vlog?
You look like my cousin Sean.
What's it? Yes.
All right? We're good?
Yeah. It's a robot. This is real fast.
All right, a lot of this chart is repeat from the last slide. The main thing that we need to know that's new on here is looking at how to name the ions. All right, most of it's repeat information. So it's mainly the new part that you need are the naming. All right, so remember cations are formed by metals. They lose electrons. They have a positive charge. All right, here's the new part, the name. Naming a cation is insanely difficult. It's really excruciatingly hard. You write the name of the element followed by the word ion. I know, it's quite difficult, right?
Wait, what was it?
You write the name of the element followed by the word ion. So, for example, potassium,
Calcium ion.
when it forms an ion, when it's K plus 1, is going to be called potassium ion.
But like, it go on in the middle.
That's for a metal. The non-metals have different rules. All right, Mg. When it forms an ion, it forms Mg plus 2. We call Mg plus 2 magnesium ion. Calcium, Ca. When it forms an ion, it's going to be Ca plus 2. So it's going to be calcium ion. All right, so that's pretty easy, right?
Because it's losing
Because
away.
it's going to lose 2 electrons. We'll talk more about why that and how to figure that out. All right, so anions are nonmetals. They gain electrons. They're going to have a negative charge. Naming them is a little bit more difficult, but not that much. To name an anion, you're going to drop the ending of the element name, replace it with IDE and the word ion.
I would like oxygen.
So for an example, oxygen, when it forms a -2 ion, instead of oxygen, it's going to be called oxide ion. Right? Nitrogen, when it forms a -3 ion, is going to be called, instead of nitrogen, it's going to be called nitride ion. You probably did.
I got a little bit of it.
A little bit, yeah. Alright, phosphorus, when it forms a -3 ion, would be called phosphide ion. Alright, so it's the element name, drop the ending, replace it with IDE in the word ion. What makes it a little bit difficult is I can't tell you what constitutes the ending. It's not always the last 3 letters or the last 2 letters or whatever. You just kind of got to make it sound. Br -1 would be bromide ion. All right. So any questions with those? Yes, ma'am.
So how do you know whenever it's -1?
We're going to look at that. Oh.
TikTok of that kid.
To view it, you gotta see it in slideshow mode. You gotta open it in slides and view it in slideshow mode. All right, we got it, or we don't need another minute?
Another minute.
I just said don't look at myself. You're just staring at myself.
I didn't hear you. Sorry, I'm
Fix them.
distracted.
Who are you Wednesday?
I've never watched the Adams Family.
Me neither.
I did.
I started watching it and I just wasn't finding it.
I want to watch the new show with Jenna.
I'm not trying to take it.
The song feels weird. I hate this. What did I just say? Stop looking at my phone.
Sorry, just keep it like
There,
saying
YouTube. Stop looking
and
at my phone.
gravitate.
That's what I'm trying to
If
fix.
the dog's playing Wizard of Oz over there,
No. Fix myself. My dogs are still in their sweater.
look at them dogs.
Don't dog my sock. Look how high my hairs are. They're not even on my heels.
I have a glow.
Someone fell down the escalators in the wall.
What?
I don't know. My mom was just like reading on Facebook. She's like, someone fell down the escalators.
Over the
All right,
side.
we got it?
No, I think he tumbled down.
We're good?
Yeah.
All right. So the next thing we want to look at, and we're kind of just introducing ions with all of this, so it's kind of just the basics for right now, is there's going to be 2 different categories of ions. You can have what's called a polyatomic ion, or you can have a monatomic ion. So let's look at the difference between the 2. You need the first 2 bullets, you don't need the last 2. So a monatomic ion is a 1-atom ion, such as Mg+2. A polyatomic ion is going to be an ion made up of more than 1 atom.
Like a,
There's certain atoms that'll covalently bond together, and then when they do so collectively as a group, they'll gain or lose electrons and act like ions. And that's what we call a polyatomic ion.
what's that math word?
Polynomial?
Yeah.
Poly just means many. So a polynomial has many.
Mr. 305.
A polyatomic ion is going to have many atoms.
Always go down. Can't do it. My eyeliner will go in.
Alright. You will have to, on the quiz, be able to identify if an ion is monatomic or polyatomic. So let's look at how to tell. Alright, if you notice on the periodic table, if the element symbol is just 1 letter, like say nitrogen, what do you notice about that letter? It's capital.
It's kind
Alright? If it is 2 letters, for the symbol, like say rubidium, RB, what do you notice about the first letter? And the second letter is lowercase. So what do you think symbolizes if you have an atom or not? If you have a capital letter. All right? So if you need to identify if you have a monatomic ion or a polyatomic ion, the easiest way to do it is a monatomic ion is going to have one capital letter in its symbol. A polyatomic ion is going to have more than one capital letter in its symbol. All right?
More than one.
Poly is many or more than one. So, let's take a pause here from the notes, and we're going to look at, if you do want to look at, follow along, and I do have this posted in classroom. It's called Identifying Ions Worksheet or something. If you want to go back and look at it later, you can as well. So this first section right here, you need to identify if we have a cation or an anion. So Na plus,
Cation.
would that be a cation or an anion?
Cation.
Okay, why?
Because it's positive.
It has a positive charge, right?
Wait, how do you know that I have a
This is a plus or
You
minus.
see you have the plus, or like -2.
Okay,
So you look at the sign above it,
So we would have to figure out that.
not for these.
Okay, so like anon is.
I am going to, the next thing we do, I am going to show you how to figure out the charge.
An anion is negative, a cation is
It's positive.
And that's
Pretty much, yes. All right, so NH plus, is that cation or anion?
Cation.
Cation.
Pitbull.
Cl minus,
Cation.
anion. S2 minus,
Anion.
ladies. Anion. SO4 minus 2.
Anion.
And Fe plus 3, or 3 plus cation. Also, you see how it has 3 plus? It doesn't matter if you put the charge first and then the number, or the number then the charge. So plus 3 and 3 plus are both the same. All right. The next section. I want to identify if it's a monatomic ion or a polyatomic ion. You'll have at least a question on the test where you're going to have to do that, or the quiz. So Na plus, is that going to be monatomic or poly?
Monatomic.
Monatomic. How can we tell?
There's only one.
You only have one capital letter, right? So if you see one capital letter, it's going to be a monatomic ion. If you see more than one capital letter, it will be a polyatomic. So NH plus,
Polyatomic.
polyatomic. Cl minus,
Monatomic.
monatomic. S2 minus,
Monatomic.
monatomic. SO4 minus 2,
Polyatomic.
polyatomic. And Fe3 plus,
Monatomic.
monatomic. All right? So, any questions on how to determine the difference between monatomic and polyatomic? Monatomic, one capital letter. Polyatomic, more than one capital letter. All right? So we're good with that?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll go back to the notes. All right, so the next thing we need to look at is how do we determine the charge of an ion? So how am I going to figure out how many electrons is it going to gain or lose? We know it's because of that, we've got to denote somehow which ion we're talking about. All right? I can't just look at the periodic table and see iron there and know if it's +2 or +3. So we got some way that we need to denote it. And the way we do that is we use a Roman numeral. So if you see like copper Roman numeral 1 ion, means copper, that ion of copper has a +1 charge. Right, so the Roman numeral tells you the charge for the transition metals. Right? Remember, since they're all metals, they're all positive. So, we go back to the identifying ion sheet. I'm going to give you a minute at most. These transition metals, tell me their charges.
Okay.
You can write them down.
He is so funny.
We all know how to read Roman numerals.
Yes.
B is 5.
5.
Give me a test on Roman
If the
numerals.
1 is
I'm
in front
halfway
of B,
line.
you subtract 1 from 5. If it's after,
Mr. Whirlwind.
So here's 1, then there's 2, then there's 3, there's 3, but it's like 3 lines.
Cut the
And there's
camera.
4 is 1, then there's 5.
charge.
Plus 1.
Plus 1.
Plus 2.
Plus 2. The Roman numeral's 2, so that means it's going to have a plus 2 charge. Ni2 ion is going to be plus 2. Cr is going to be
Plus 6.
plus 6, and Fe is going to be
Plus 3.
plus 3.
Oh my god.
And
Extra metal.
since they're metals, yes, they'll all be plus. All right? So any questions with finding the charge of a transition metal?
So.
We're good with that. All right, that's going to point out one other thing we need to mention too with this is if you have a transition metal and you have to write the name. We said the name of a cation is the element's name followed by the word ion, correct?
Yes.
So if I had Mg plus 2, then it's magnesium ion. Let's say I gave you Fe plus 3 and asked you to write its name.
It's not supposed to be.
Right? So Fe is a transition metal, correct? So if you have a transition metal, you can't just write its name. So it's iron, but I got to tell you what iron ion it is because you can have more than one. So what you do is you look at the number of the charge, and you put that as the Roman numeral. So if you iron Roman numeral 3,
Ion.
iron. And that's just for transition metals. So if I gave you Cu plus 2, how would you write its name? Copper.
Roman numerals 2. Ion.
Why are you angry?
Ion.
All right. So any questions with that?
It's just one of those.
You will have one like that on the quiz where I give you a transition metal and you gotta write.
Mad at the world.
Are we going to get a periodic table?
This is not that deep stuff.
What time is it?
Your balls are not that far.
Y'all heard that?
Subtitles, Steve.
All right. Let's go ahead and finish. Let's say I want you to identify the name, the symbol, and the charge, or the name of a polyatomic ion. All right? So the polyatomic ions, I'm going to give you a list of. And that's what I gave you this sheet for. All right? So if you look here, under where it says the ions, and it says polyatomic, here is a list of the names of polyatomic ions. All right? So if I ask you to identify either a name or a formula of a polyatomic ion and the charge, you look for it on here. So for example, if we have chlorate. So I'm going to find the word chlorate on here.
ClO3.
And it says, you look, it gives you the formula ClO3, and you see it has a little minus.
Yeah.
on it, that means its charge is -1. The ones they leave off sometimes. So if you see just a plus or just a minus, that means it's +1 or a -1 charge. All right? So if I will give you those polyatomic ions for the quiz and the test. All right? So if I have sulfate ion, what's its formula in charge?
SO4 minus 2.
SO4 minus 2.
Bro, it's on
You
the
look on the. You look on this paper. If you have a nitrate ion, that's going to be what?
It's going to be NO3 minus 1.
NO3 minus 1. All right, so any questions with that? All right, make sure you look carefully, or you watch carefully though. There are a lot of them that look very similar. Like you'll have sulfate and you'll have sulfite.
So if it's just a
Nitrate, nitrite. So make sure you match. You make sure you match the names.
so if it's just a negative or just it'll be a 1.
Right. So any questions with that? So you'll have something like that on the quiz. I may give you the formula of a polyatomic ion and ask you for its name. You just find the formula on here, you look up the name. Or I'll give you the name and ask you for the formula in the chart. All right? Again, you'll look anything that's a polyatomic ion, you'll look up on this list. And I will give you the list for the quiz and the test. All right? So any questions with that? All right, there's one other thing for the quiz, and then we'll continue with the notes. Is, let's say I give you magnesium ion, Mg+2. And I ask you, how many electrons are in magnesium ion? All right? So if I ask you, how many electrons are in magnesium ion?
14.
All right? So if we look, magnesium, when it's neutral, meaning it doesn't have a charge, right? It's not an ion. The number of protons and the number of electrons are the same, right?
12.
So neutral would be 12, correct? But what does the +2 mean?
Adding 2.
It has a +2 charge, which means it didn't add 2, it lost 2, right? Because remember, you're losing and gaining negative, so it's going to be the opposite. So this +2 means that it lost 2 electrons, right? So if it started with 12 and lost 2, it's going to have how many? 10. So basically, to find the number of electrons for an ion, you look at its charge, and you do the opposite operation to the atomic number. So if it's a +2, you would subtract 2 from the atomic number. If it's a -2, you would add 2. So if I gave you P -3 and asked you how many electrons does a phosphide ion have? So we find phosphorus, which has 15, normally, right? Its atomic number is 15. Since it has a -3 charge, that means I need to add 3. So it would be 18 electrons. All right? So any questions with that? All right. So, your quiz tomorrow is basically that identifying ions worksheet in multiple choice format. Plus, you'll have to be able to determine the number of electrons in an ion, and then you'll have to either name or you'll have to write the names of the, or you'll have to not write, just pick out the name of an ion. All right? So any questions about the quiz? That should be pretty easy, right? All right. So now let's go ahead and finish the slideshow. We got time.